Welcome to the sales and marketing portion of the NAELB Distance Learning Series. Now, this portion is really close to my heart because this is where all the fun starts. This may be the whole reason why you're watching this video education series. Now, with small ticket leasing, transactions under $100,000, everything starts with the vendor. It all starts with calling on the vendor. Some people think that you want to talk to the end user or the lessee to start the transaction, but that's a difficult way to go because you have to be in front of the lessee at the perfect time when they're about to buy equipment. And a lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, we'll use you, but then they forget about you. So your job is to be top of mind all the time. And when you're working with the vendor, it's much easier to be top of mind because the vendor is always out there in front of lessees all day long. So if you get the vendor on your side and promoting your leasing company, it just makes it that much easier. Then it's your job to get the lessee and to continue to have the lessee as a customer once you get that first transaction in the door. Okay, so you're calling on vendors, and when you're calling on vendors, there's three different levels you can have. The first level is the commodity level. That's where they use you just because either your rates are low, or you can do a new business program, or there's something about what you have sold to them that just makes them want to give the application to you for the first time. You're just a commodity. And that's how you're going to get applications in the door most of the time. Then you move up to the next level, which is the credibility level, where they say, okay, well, I've used ABC Leasing Company and I've used XYZ Leasing Company. They both did a decent job, so I'm going to give it to both of them at the same time and see who gets back to me first. A lot of vendors operate that way if you're only at that level. But your job as a professional equipment leasing salesperson, professional equipment leasing broker, is to go out and get to that top level, which is the partnership advisor level. That's where they think of you first. They get an application in the door, they're out there making sales, and you have convinced them that they should quote leasing on every proposal. And that's really what your job is. There's two types of vendors out there. One type, they're already using leasing already. They're using a competitor. So I like to call them a take account. You're taking that business away from another leasing company. Or the other vendor is somebody who said, oh, leasing, we let our customers decide. And you're going to come in there and you're going to convince them to put leasing on every proposal that they offer so that once they use it, they're going to be hooked. And that's what happens. And that's really a good way for brokers to get established and to get some business in the door, to work with smaller vendors who really haven't used financing before and get them to quote it, get them comfortable with it. And then once you pay them really quickly, they are hooked and they love it. And they're grateful for you for convincing them to take that opportunity, to take that step to use leasing. So it's either a take account from another vendor, another equipment leasing company, or it's a make account where they're using leasing for the first time, okay? So you're calling on somebody, and even if it's a make account where they've never done leasing before, they're just using you the first time because you've convinced them and you're at that commodity level. I just want to make this point because so many people think that they call on a vendor and they're going to get an application the very first time they call, and that person's going to use them again and again and again. I wish it happened that way, but it doesn't. The first time you call them, you're just trying to get them to remember who you are and establish trust. It might take 8, 10 times, or more talking to them on the phone before they give you the shot at their customer, at that application, because they're afraid. They don't want you to come in and mess up their transaction. Their job is to sell equipment, and they just want to sell that equipment. So they think if they get a leasing company involved in the transaction that they're going to lose control and they might not get their sale. So it's your job as a professional to make them comfortable, get that application first time just on the commodity level, do a good job, and then move up the ranks. You go to that credibility level, and then finally you get to that partnership advisor level when they think of you first. So how do you do this? Well, it all starts with leads, and leads are everywhere. You're going to get leads off of the internet. You can buy lists of leads. You can buy email addresses. But the whole thing is to have a constant swarming offense. It's where, when they get their email, they'll see an email from you. In the direct mail, they're going to get mail from you. On Facebook, they can see a posting from your company. On Twitter, you got to be using social media marketing also, but you still have to call. Cold calling is essential to our business. And it doesn't have to be cold. You can ask for referrals. There's lots of ways to go about it, but it all starts with picking up the phone and talking to someone. Can you go out and make face-to-face calls? Absolutely. I've sold leasing face-to-face, calling on vendors, and I've sold leasing over the phone. And I found, for the most part, they really don't want to see me. They may want to see me after a while to solidify the relationship, but in the beginning, they just want to know, who I am, what I can do, that I'm going to come through on the things that I talk about. They don't want me stopping by their office all the time because they're busy. So I went from an outside salesperson to an inside salesperson, and I didn't think it would work, but it really does work. However, you have to be disciplined when you're at your desk prospecting. There are some leasing companies out there that make people make 80 dials a day. That's the minimum amount of dials. As a broker, you're probably not going to make 80 dials a day. But in the beginning, when you're getting started, you're going to have to make 40, 50 dials every day because you don't have any other transactions to do. There's nothing taking your time away. So you got to put in the time to call on these vendors, okay? And break their preoccupation and get them interested in what you have to say. Because when you call on somebody, they're either busy, preoccupied, or initially disinterested. And it's your job to break their preoccupation and get them interested in what you have to say. Now, if they're busy, you just get off the phone because, there's nothing more annoying if they're legitimately busy, they have customers in there, and you're calling trying to sell them something. So if they're preoccupied, it takes a really good opening statement for you to break their preoccupation, and everybody's listening to the same radio station in their head. It's WIIFM, which stands for What's in It for Me. So your opening statement on the phone to these vendors that you're calling has to break their preoccupation and get them interested. Tell them something that's in it for them. Like, the opening statement is so important. People don't realize, but it's like if you've ever played billiards, if you've ever played pool, when you make that initial break of the balls, if you break it well, the game goes so much easier because the balls are dispersed amongst the table. But if you don't break it well, all those balls are still in the middle of the table. That's the same thing with a good opening statement. If you have a good opening statement and you tell the vendor what's in it for them and you give them some ideas, then they're going to be more willing to listen to you and everything goes smoother. I have another analogy about the opening statement. It's kind of like backing your car out of the garage in the morning. If you don't know how to back your car out of the garage, you could ding your side view mirrors. But if you know what you're doing, you just smoothly back it up and you're on your way. And that's what a good opening statement is about. And so many people miss this part of prospecting, of sales. They just pick up the phone and say the first thing that comes out of their head. They'll say something like, "Hi, this is Linda. I'm with ABC Leasing Company, and I just wanted to introduce myself to you, or I wanted to set up a time to get together." Those statements, those opening statements are what everybody else is saying, and they're garbage. So as an equipment leasing professional, I want you to craft a really good opening statement so you can back the car out of the garage and get on your way right away. One of my favorite opening statements is, "Hi, this is Linda from ABC Leasing. The reason for my call is I have a couple ideas that can help you sell more equipment." So you're telling them an idea. So if they're the right person, they're going to say, "Okay, what is it?" Because everybody's interested in new ideas. And you're telling something that's in it for them because you can help them sell more equipment. So, there's lots of different vendors out there, and it's your job to find a specific niche that's going to work for you. A lot of people are calling on office equipment vendors, telephone vendors, computer vendors, which can work. And there are computer vendors out there, there's software vendors out there that still haven't used leasing. Copier vendors have all used leasing, and they know leasing in and out. They use it every day, and they're always looking for the lowest rates. So that's something you have to be aware of if you're calling on that industry. But my advice to you is to call on a smaller industry. There's plenty of examples out there. You could lease audio-visual equipment. You could lease surveying equipment. You can lease jewelry making equipment. There's so many different types, and you really have to have the attitude, the mindset that there is an abundance of business out there, because there is. If you think in terms of scarcity, oh, I call on these people and they're all happy with who they're using, or, they're not using leasing, well, then you're never going to be successful, okay? Because you're going to hear that they're happy with who they're using. You call somebody up and they say, oh, we're happy with who we're using. That's a brush off. So what I want you to say to that is, many of my best vendors, my best customers said the same thing the very first time I called them. Who are you using for leasing? So you're brushing off their brush off, and then you find out who they're using, okay? And then if people say, oh, I just let my customers pay cash, these are objections. You're going to get lots of objections along the way. But in the very beginning of prospecting, people may hear these objections right off the bat. And they say, I just let my customers pay cash. Well, then it's your job to keep that conversation going. You can say, yeah, I understand a lot of people do pay cash. Do you get repeat business? Have you ever just put it on the proposal? And that's how I've convinced people who have never used leasing before. I just say, look, it'll take 2 seconds. I'll give you my lease calculator. There's lots of lease calculators out there on the internet. And I want you to print out a monthly payment. It's super easy. And then just take a stapler and staple this to the back of your proposal. That's all you have to do. Piece of paper printed out, staple it to the back of your equipment proposal. And you're going to see that your sales go up 30% just by offering financing. So that's what you have to do, and it may take 8-10 calls to get to this point with the vendor. You've got to help them open up their mind and show them that their sales really can increase by using equipment financing, because they do. It works. But some people, you just have to really convince them of that. People who are already using it, it's your job to have that good opening statement, get them to trust you, and then tell them a different program that they might not be getting from the vendor that they're using right now, so that you are at that commodity level. Remember, you're at that commodity level. They're just using you for one thing. You do a really good job on that transaction, and then you move up the triangle till you get to that partnership advisor level. So, I really think to be successful in leasing sales, you need 3 things. You need knowledge, and we talked about the knowledge a little bit on our first one, talking about Leasing 101. And the remaining part of this video education series, we're going to talk a lot more about leasing knowledge, about the legal aspects of it and the accounting aspects of it. But to get applications in the door, you need the skills, okay? So you need knowledge, skills, and motivation. The knowledge you're going to get over the course of time and watching this. The skills is what this is about right now. The skills are how to break their preoccupation, what to say, how to resolve their objections, how to close the sale, okay? And then you have to have the motivation, because you could have all the leasing knowledge in the world. You could take your HP 17B and be able to print out an amortization schedule and tell them, exactly, how payments are broken down into interest and principal and interest. But it doesn't matter unless you have that motivation to pick up the phone and day in and day out to be prospecting, because you always have to be prospecting in some ways. It might not have to be as much as when you're starting out, making 50 to 80 dials a day, talking to people, but your vendors are going to change. People are going to leave. Vendors get cut off sometimes from funding sources. So you always have to be prospecting, always looking for new vendors to bring in the door. And it doesn't take a ton of vendors to be successful. One vendor for me changed my whole career. I was out there struggling, and then I would get a couple vendors who would throw me transactions every once in a while. But for a year, I called on this one vendor that sold medical equipment. And everybody said, oh, no, you can't do medical equipment. We can't compete because, our rates are too high. Medicals are really low rates. But the thing with leasing sales is it's all about relationships. That's what it's about, relationships. People want to do business with people that they like and they trust. So I was calling on this medical equipment vendor for a year. And they were happy with who they were using, but they were using leasing. And I asked all my qualifying questions, which is what I want you to ask when you're on these initial prospect calls. Qualifying questions like, how many salespeople do you have? Have you ever used financing? Basically, what manufacturers do you represent? You get these basic qualifying questions down. and then you build that trust. So over a year, I kept calling on them, and finally, their leasing salesperson that they were using got promoted from the company they were using. And they, instead of staying with that company, they said, you know what? Let's give Linda a try. She's been tenacious, she's been persistent, and that's a lot of being successful in sales also. So we're gonna give her a try. Now, all of a sudden, I got this vendor who had, they had 10 salespeople that used me. They had 4 others that still used other leasing companies. But those 10 salespeople used me. Their average transaction size was $25,000. They sent me, they thought of me first. And all of a sudden, I went from being a struggling salesperson to getting application after application in the door. And I, got the accolades, made President's Club, made good commission, and everything changed. And the reason I'm telling you that story is because, it was one vendor that changed it for me. So when you're out there and you're struggling with trying to find vendors, just realize that it doesn't have to be 20. It doesn't have to be 30 vendors that you have. If you can have 10 vendors, and 3 of them are really good vendors, then that's going to help you be a very successful leasing broker. All right? So you just got to hang in there. So when you call on a vendor, you've got to think, why are they going to use you? What about leasing is important to them? And that is a great question right there. I want you to ask the question when you get into the sale with them. After you've asked, okay, what manufacturers do you represent? Have you used leasing? What are your goals this year? You'd really try to help them. You're trying to help them increase their sales. But then, if they've used leasing before, I want you to ask the question, what is most important to you in a leasing company? That is the key question to ask, because once you get the answer to that question, you find out what's most important to them, then you found out their sweet spot. And every time you call to follow up, because they're not going to give you, they may give you business on the first call. It does happen. However, getting an application on that first call is like when you watch football and they kick off and they run it all the way back down for a touchdown. That's the same thing as getting an application on the first call. What I'm trying to teach you how to do is just to take that on that opening statement, run it out to the 20-yard line. And then on the next call, get a first down. Keep moving those chains forward so that you're going to get an application. If you expect to get an application on the very first call, that's really setting the bar a little bit too high. What I would like you to do is to get a little bit more information every time you call and keep those chains moving forward. Because what I find out with most salespeople is they'll call up and they'll ask a couple questions, and the first calls are usually pretty easy. They'll give you some information. And then that you send out information, and then you call to follow up. And you say, okay, did you get the information I got? They say, yeah. And you say, do you have any questions? They say, no. And then you say, oh, okay, well, I'll call you up in a couple weeks and keep my information on file just in case anybody asks about it. And that is the follow-up call from hell. You don't move anything forward. You're not allowed to have follow-up calls like that. On your initial call, if you get the answer to that question, what's most important to you in a leasing company, then every follow-up call is that much easier, because when you say, oh, Keith, we had this conversation about 3 weeks ago, and you mentioned what was really important to you was fast turnaround time. Well, I just got this application in the door, and I was able to approve it within an hour, and I thought of you. That's a much different follow-up call than, did you get my information? Do you have any questions? You're telling them something specific to them that was their hot button. And you can always refer back to that. And that engages them. And that's your whole thing. When you're making these first couple prospect calls and you haven't talked to them, you've got to let your personality come through. Because again, people do business, with people that they like and they trust. So you've got to become likable right away. You can't sound robotic. You've got to have a personality. I have listened to thousands of calls over the years. And the people who are scared and don't let any personality come through, they can still get applications. It just takes a lot longer. But if you're comfortable, if you're confident, if you have a personality, then that's going to shorten the sales cycle and you're going to get applications faster. Okay? So when you're first calling on a company, what I'd like you to do is when that gatekeeper, whoever answers the phone, if there is someone who answers the phone, because you may get voicemail, but if there's somebody who answers the phone, I want you to say, I need your help. Can you help me? Can you give me the name of somebody in your sales department? Or who would handle, equipment financing at your company? But I even hesitate to ask that question because a lot of times these gatekeepers don't understand what leasing is. So if you say, oh, who would handle leasing? They'd say, oh, leasing, we don't use leasing. So you can just say something like, I need your help. Could you tell me the name of your sales manager? Or could I talk to someone in sales? Because salespeople will always give you lots of information. So that's a really good place to start. It's better to do that than to call right for the decision maker, because I've made prospect calls where I got right through to the decision maker and I start asking them basic qualifying questions and they go like this, they go, because they don't have time to deal with a sales rep who hasn't done their homework before. So what I'd like you to do is not to have call reluctance. I want you to quickly pull up the company that you're going to call on the internet, look and see if they have a website, and look and see if you can find out who the decision maker is. And then before you actually get through to that decision maker, ask somebody in sales or the gatekeeper if they can give you some basic information so that when you get through to that decision maker, you can say, hey, I was on your website, it's very impressive. That breaks the walls right there. And then you say, I understand that you represent this manufacturer, this manufacturer, this manufacturer, and we have lots of ideas that I can help you increase your sales through those manufacturers. So let's go through the sales process. It starts with the opening statement, and I want you to craft a really good opening statement, not one that sounds like what everybody else is saying, like I wanted to introduce my company or my services to you, or I'm calling to check in with you. I call that the probation officer opening statement, because if you're on probation, you have to call and check in, right? So nobody wants to hear that. They don't want you to call and check in. And the worst possible opening statement you can use is, hey, this is Linda. I was calling to see if you have any applications for me. No, 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 because that's all about you. Remember, your opening statement is getting them to break their preoccupation and telling them what's in it for them. So, another opening statement could be, hi, this is Linda with ABC Leasing Company. The reason for my call is, depending on what you're experiencing in the area of equipment leasing, there's a possibility I can help you increase your sales while at the same time, decrease any paperwork that you may be having to deal with. So you're telling something you can help with in two different ways, maximizing something and minimizing something. So there's lots of different opening statements that you can use. And in the workbook, you're going to have information on crafting your own opening statement. But it's very, very important to have that good opening statement and not just sound like everybody else. Not say the first thing that pops into your head when you get them on the phone, okay? And then the next step is to get the basic pre-qualifying questions out of the way. And hopefully you do this before you talk to the decision maker. How long have they been in business? What type of equipment do they specialize in? How many employees do they have? How many sales reps do they have? What's their average transaction size? What manufacturers do they represent? These are basic qualifying questions, and the sooner you have these, the better, because then when you talk to the decision maker, it's going to make your conversation that much easier. Okay? So you're sitting down, you got your list of leads, you've got your opening statement ready, and the office is really quiet, and everybody else in the office can hear you prospect. And you get butterflies in your stomach, and you don't want it. It's hard. It's really hard. And I have seen a lot of sales reps fail in this way because they don't want everybody around them to hear them making mistakes. And I've done it too. I've been on the phone where somebody hung up on me, and I've kind of kept the conversation going, even though it was a dial tone on the other end saying, okay, yeah, well, I'll send that information out to you. Just know that if they hang up on you, it's okay. That's the worst thing that's going to happen. And realize that even if people in the office are listening to you while you're doing this, you're in sales. You've got to pick up the phone. You've got to make call after call, and it gets easier when you do it. So just, don't be afraid. Pick up the phone, have a good opening statement, and just know that you can help people, because that's what really motivated me when I started doing equipment leasing sales. I was helping the people get the equipment they needed to run their business. And I would get thank you notes from lessees when I got a difficult transaction done. So that was why I loved it, because I was helping the vendor sell more equipment, and I was helping the lessees get the equipment that they really needed to grow their business. So when you think of it from that perspective, it becomes a lot easier. All right, so you pick up the phone and you have a good opening statement ready, you've got your pre-qualifying questions answered, and you're ready to talk to the decision maker, and you get voicemail. That's going to happen. It happens in at least 75% of all the calls that you make. How do you handle a voicemail? Well, I want you to leave a message. I want you to leave a message on every call. Some people will say, oh, you shouldn't leave a message because in the unlikely event that they call you back, you're prospecting and you're going to be like, who is this? Where are you calling from? No, 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 no. I want you to leave a message every time you call. However, the message has to be value added. It has to tell them something that's in it for them. It could be a little commercial if you like. But the reason I say to leave a message is because I worked with this one leasing company, Advana Leasing, and then I left Advana and I was working with another leasing company who did something very similar. And what happened was Advana Leasing shut their doors, okay? And the people at this other leasing company that I was training, they were calling and not leaving messages. And now all of a sudden those vendors needed a new leasing company, and those salespeople who had been calling and not leaving messages didn't get the goodwill. Things are changing so quickly in our industry, in the banking industry, in the internet, that I want you to get the goodwill by calling on these people and leaving a message. Let them know that you called. But your voicemail, again, has to give an idea. You know, it could say something like, hey, I've got this great promotion. You know, we're talking about IRS Section 179. You know, give me a call back. And you could say something like, oh, I have 90-day deferred right now, so your customer doesn't have to make any payments till the start of the new year. There's all different kinds of really good openings, you know, statements that you can use in a voicemail. And, you know, will your voicemail get returned? You know, not likely. They still don't get returned. Maybe 20%, even if you're leaving a really good voicemail message, will get returned. But when they do call you back, I want you to just pretend like you were waiting for that call. There's nothing worse than calling back a salesperson and having them go, who, huh, what are you talking about? Then the prospect feels like, they feel like a big dummy for calling you back. So if they call you back, you've got to be smooth and say, oh yes, thank you for returning my call. I was calling to tell you about this great new program that we have. And then get them talking. That's the key with all of this stuff. You know, having that opening statement and leaving a good voicemail is the whole key. Is when you get them on the phone to ask them questions and to get them to do the talking. A good prospect call is when they talk, not you. And you try to get them to open up and you find out what's most important to them. And then they're going to be more likely to start the equipment leasing relationship with you, okay? So if you do get voicemail, I want you to listen to their entire voicemail message. I would work with salespeople who would get voicemail and just hang up, not listen to it. But I want you to listen to it and get clues. They might say, I'm on vacation. Then you don't call them back the day they get back from vacation. You give them a couple of days to get back into the office, get back into the groove of things, and then you call them up and say, hey, how was your vacation? That breaks their preoccupation right there. Call at different times of the day. Most salespeople do this. They get in the office 8:30. They have a cup of coffee. They look at their email. And then, finally about 9:30, they start making phone calls. That's what everybody else is doing. If you want to be successful, you're going to have to shake it up. Get in the office at 8 o'clock. Bang out some of those calls in the very beginning of the day, because the decision maker could be there and they pick up the phone right away. They're not out making calls. It's maybe a better time to get through to the people that you need to talk to. Or you call at the end of the day, after 5 o'clock, when they're in the office doing their paperwork. I used to sell equipment, so I wasn't allowed to be in the office between 9 and 4. I could only come back to the office at 4 o'clock to then do the proposals that I have to do. So if you were going to call on me as a salesperson, you'd want to get me at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, because that's when I'm sitting at my desk. The rest of the time, I was out there selling equipment. So, shake it up. Don't just call at, 9, 10 o'clock like everybody else is doing. I'm not saying don't call at those times, because you still have to call. You have to make those calls to be successful. I'm saying that if you want to avoid voicemail, try to call at different times of the day. When you get voicemail, another trick is to zero out and go to the operator and ask them if there's somebody else that can help you. Or another thing you can do is try the next extension. Like if the extension is 4186, just dial 4187, if you're not getting through all the time, and talk to the person who answers the phone there. Try to get through that way. It's like a game with voicemail. And if you just say, oh, I can't get through, I always just get voicemail every time you call, well, you're never going to get through. If you've identified this guy being a good prospect by their website, by LinkedIn, by the different tools that are available to you, then you can use voicemail in different ways to try to get through and to penetrate that company. All right. So another thing to do is to be funny. This is not rocket science. So you can be funny, tell them a joke. I sat next to somebody who would say, if you don't return my call, I've called you 10 times, you don't return my call, next time I'm going to sing when I get your voicemail. So, and she would do it. She would sing into the voicemail, and that would get the person to call them back. You got to shake things up and not just leave the same dull message every time, because they're never going to call you back. All right. So you finally call and you get the good opening statement, you get through to them, you don't get voicemail, you get through to them, and then what happens next? Then you've got to ask really good questions, okay? Again, it's getting them to talk, getting them interested, because what might be important to you might not be important to them. So, a good prospect call, like I say, if I would call up and say, hi, this is Linda from ABC Leasing. The reason for my call is I have a couple ideas that I really think can help you sell more surveying equipment or whatever it might be that they're selling. If I've caught you at a good time, I'd like to ask you a couple questions to see if we have a match. And then if you've done your pre-qualifying calls already, you could say, okay, I understand that you represent this manufacturer and that manufacturer, and you have this many salespeople. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. And then you start asking them really good questions that are open-ended, that start with like who, what, tell me about, and the first good question could be, tell me about the manufacturers that you represent. Tell me, what does the next leasing company have to do to earn your business? You can tell me how many leasing companies do you use? Do you use more than one? Do you sell used equipment? That's a really good question, because some people think, oh, I can't call on captive equipment. I can't call on captive vendors. And a captive vendor may be somebody who works with a certain manufacturer, like, for example, John Deere, and they have John Deere Leasing. They have their own individual leasing programs. Well, if they sell used equipment, that's a perfect opportunity for a broker, because those manufacturing programs, a lot of times they won't only do their equipment and only do new equipment. So as a broker, you can come in, you can represent different manufacturers for them, and you can do used equipment. So you've got to ask these questions, ask good questions, ask them right away. So you could ask a question like, what does the next leasing company have to do to earn your business, right? Or another really good question is, what would have to happen for you to consider using another leasing company? Or it could be just a simple, tell me about your business. How many proposals have you not been able to close because you haven't had financing? Now, they might not know the answer to that, but if I'm calling on somebody who, again, I consider a make account, that they've never used leasing before, I'll say to them, okay, do you have any proposals where you just haven't heard back from your customer? If you haven't heard back from them, what I can do, just give me their name and their address and the basic information, and I'll see if I can get them approved, if it's under $100,000, application only, just getting basic information on them, so that you can go back into them and say, hey, I haven't heard from you, but I was able to get you approved for financing. Is this something you might be interested in? So that's a really good way to go back into accounts that they may have heard nothing from. Another way to do that too is to say, look, have you had any transactions that were declined? Now, this is a little bit of a slippery slope, because if they've already used leasing and they were declined, most likely they're going to be declined, but you never know. As a broker, you have many different funding sources to go to, so you might be able to get that that decline transaction approved for them, and that's a way in the door. And what we're looking for in the very beginning is just a way to get your foot in the door. Now you have to be careful. You don't want to just go in and try to get all their decline transactions, because you don't want that kind of business all the time. But you're just trying to get them to use you, to send you an application. I made the mistake of the first leasing company I worked for. They had a new business program where if the company was 6 months in business, you could add 0.0030 to the rate factor and get an extra payment down, and we were able to do the new business. So I would go to vendors and I'd say, we do new businesses, give me your new businesses. And then they'd send me the new business, right? And what would happen? It'd get declined. And then I'd go back to the vendor, it was declined, and they'd say, well, you said you could do new businesses and you can't. That's it. I'm not giving you another try. So you don't want to lead with something that's really difficult to produce. You want to lead, again, you're a commodity in the beginning, so you've got to lead with something, right? So there's a lot of funding sources out there now that are offering brokers pre-funding. So you could talk to them about possibly getting the transaction funded before it's even installed. You know, you can talk to them. There's lots of different things that you can talk to them about in your marketing materials, but just be careful of the things that you can really deliver upon, because if you can't deliver on those first things that you're talking about, it makes it that much more difficult. And our business is difficult in some ways because you're going to get an application and it's going to get declined. That's why it's important to get that rapport going from the very beginning, asking those questions, getting them talking. And if you can talk about anything else besides leasing, try to do that as soon as possible. You know, if they say they're on vacation on their voicemail, ask them about their vacation, ask them where they went, make notes in your system. If they're, you know, a big football game coming up, or the baseball World Series going on, ask them their opinions about these things. Try to get your personality to come through, because inevitably a transaction is going to get declined and you don't want the relationship to stop there. You need to get that rapport going so that they'll use you again and again and again, okay? So you call, you have your good opening statement, you ask really good questions when you talk, you get them on the phone, then you've got to follow up. And remember what I said about follow-up calls. If you get the answer to that question, what's most important to you, what is most important to you in a leasing company, that makes your follow-up call that much easier, okay? So you're not calling up and say, hey, do you have any business for me? No, 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 no. You're calling up and saying, I was thinking about you because of this program. I know that this was important to you, and that makes it that much easier. And you've got to follow up. You know, everybody says this is a common question I get. Well, Linda, how often should I follow up? How quickly? Well, you don't want to be a nuisance. You know, there are some vendors out there that don't do leasing that often, and they're not offering it. So it's your job to convince them. Remember, just look, all I want you to do is take my estimate of how much it's going to be and staple it to the back of your proposal, and you're going to see your sales increase at least 30%. And they will if they aren't offering it already. It really does work. If they are already offering leasing, then you want to get them to use your company and be comfortable using you. So, you know, every follow-up call that you do, it might take 8, might take 10. You've got to come up with a new idea so that you're relevant, so that when they see their caller ID and they see it's ABC Leasing Company, they're going to pick it up. Because they're going to say, you know what, it's Linda, and she always gives me a new idea. So I'm open to talking to her. It could be, I'll say something like, oh, I read this article about sales, and I thought of you, and send it to them. And every time you call, if you're giving them something of value on the follow-up calls, then they're going to be more willing to take your call. If you're just calling them up and say, hey, you got any deals for me? They're going to get frustrated, they're going to dodge your call, and you're never going to get any business from them. So that's the key to follow-up calls. So then, on your follow-up calls, you might get more objections. It might take you a little while to get through to the real objection. I used to be out there calling on leasing companies, and I would say, okay, can I send you some information? They say, sure, and I'd leave them some information. And then I'd either call them back on the phone or go out there again. And, you know, and don't take me wrong, I said in the beginning that I do think it works better to call over the phone, but as a broker, you do have the flexibility to go out. So if you are talking to somebody and you decided that they are a top 10 prospect, somebody that you can really get business from that would help you, then, if they're locally, go out and visit them. Take them out to lunch. Bring some donuts by in the morning. Everybody likes food. That's, a really good way to, get that rapport going. So, it doesn't have to be all over the phone, but I do think the phone is the most efficient way to do it. So you're calling them up, you've had a couple good calls, you've sent them some information, but then they say, you know what, Linda, the objection they're giving to you would be, I think your rates might be too high. Okay. Well, that's a knee-jerk reaction. A lot of people say that rates are most important to them in a leasing company. So if that's the answer to the question is rates, if you get that rate objection right there, I would say, well, besides rates, what's most important to you? Because everybody is concerned about rates, and you're not going to be the highest rate, you're not going to be the lowest rate, you're going to be in between. So, when I get that rate objection, if it's very early on, I just brush it to the side and I'll say something like, okay, besides rates. But if further in the call they're giving you that rate objection, then you could say, okay, well, let's just make sure we're comparing apples to apples. What are you comparing us to? And, if you're getting a end user, a lessee, saying that your rates are too high, you got to find out, okay, what are you comparing us to? Are you comparing us to bank financing? Or if another objection is, all my customers pay cash. A lot of vendors say that. I just deal with cash. And if people say that to me, I'll say, okay, well, how long does it actually take you to get the cash? Are they taking 30 days to cut the check? Are they taking 60 days to cut the check? Even though they're paying you cash, it might not mean that they're paying you right away. So if you deal with us as a leasing company, I'm going to pay you as soon as it's installed. You're going to have that cash. I'm going to put the funds directly into your account the next day. Or I can Federal Express you the check, as soon as the equipment is installed. So even though they're saying they're paying cash, you really have got to dig down and say, how quickly are you getting paid? Because I'm going to pay you as a leasing company way faster than the lessee is going to pay you. So that's just another way to resolve that objection. And the most common objections are, your price is too high, your turnaround is too slow, we're happy with our existing leasing company, we don't do much leasing, I deal with large customers and all my customers pay cash, or just send me some information. Just tell me what you have. And just realize when you're getting these objections, you gotta give them more information and get them to change their mind on their own. That's what happens. Give them more information. It's kind of like dealing with a credit analyst. If your transaction is declined, they're not gonna, and you go back and appeal it, they're not gonna say, oh, okay, since you asked nice the second time, I'm gonna change the transaction. It's going to be approved for you now. No, it doesn't work that way. It's the same with sales. If, they're giving you an objection, you got to really listen to that objection, listen to understand, where they're coming from, and then give them more information so that they can change their mind on their own. And there's going to be more information about this in your handout too. So we're talking about objections that you're getting here, but it also makes me think about objectives on the call, because when you're calling people, I want you to have a primary objective and a secondary objective, and I want you to think about these before you pick up the phone, because there's nothing worse than making that call, hanging up, having it be like a 30-second call, and you say, oh, why didn't I ask him this? So before you pick up the phone, it's really important to say, what is my primary objective on this call? It might be to find out who the decision maker is. It might be to find out what manufacturers they use. It might be to find out what's most important to them in a leasing company. It might be to get them to look at your lease calculator that you have online. It might be to get them to put it on the proposal. But identify in your head what your objective is, so that it's going to move those chains forward again. It's going to keep that call moving forward. Okay, so you've got to set your objective and then be prepared if they give you any objections. And you're going to get objections. That's a good thing. People are like, oh, they're happy with this company. Great, 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 great. Because then you know that they're using leasing. You're going to stay in touch, not necessarily calling them all the time. And yeah, like I said, people are saying, how often do I call them back? How often do I stay in front of them? It depends. If they're doing a little bit of leasing, then maybe every 6 weeks. If they're doing a lot of leasing, maybe sooner. But the Direct Marketing Association says that more people like to be contacted through email than they do by the phone. And I want you to shake it up. I want you to call them, and I also want you to send them emails. But you've got to, if you're just thinking of just staying in touch just by calling them, then that's really difficult. You got to be sending out different value-added emails too, so that you are top of mind when they do get that application in the door. That's the key. You want them to think of you first. And I call it a constant swarming offense. I'm calling them, I'm emailing them, I'm staying in front of them on social media, on LinkedIn. And that's another topic to talk about too, is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is right now, that's a really great tool. And what I would tell you is once you're prospecting, I want you to identify your top 10 prospects. Okay, 10 people that you can get business from that you know will really help you. And then I want you to go on LinkedIn and make sure that you have a current headshot so that if you ever met them somewhere, they would be able to recognize who you are. And I want you to go through and see if any of your contacts are connected to anybody at your top 10 prospects location. Because you never know who knows who. And that's the beauty of LinkedIn. Your next door neighbor could know somebody who works at that prospect. And then what you do is you email the person you know, your next door neighbor, and you say, hey, can you send an email to so-and-so and let them know that you know me and I'm a decent person? And not through LinkedIn. Don't use it through LinkedIn. Just ask them to send an email from their own email account through introducing you. But that's another way to get business in the door. So we talked about your opening statements. We talked about setting your objectives, okay? We talked about, questioning skills. Ask as many questions as you can. Get them talking as much as you can. We've talked about objectives, objections, what to say when they say, my customers pay cash. And there is going to be details of this in the workbook. And then that brings us to the close, which is asking for the business. And every time you end a conversation with a vendor or a lessee, I would, with the vendor, I would like you to say, are you working on anything right now that I can help you out with? It's just an easy way to end the call because, the vendor, they might be thinking about using you in the future, but they're not thinking about the transactions that they have on their desk right then. So before, it's like a soft kind of close. Are there any transactions that you're working on right now that I could help you out with? If you're talking to a lessee, my line to the lessee is, are you going to be acquiring any new equipment in the next 90 days? And then you find out from there that you can follow up from there. Otherwise, it's, can you promise me that you'll give me a shot at your next transaction? Because if people make a promise, they generally do remember that. But it's up to you to be top of mind because you never know how long it's going to take them till they're acquiring new equipment. But every time you get off the phone or you end a conversation, I want you to, do some kind of soft closing technique. And it could be, okay, so you're sold on using this, right? You're gonna, you're gonna present this to your sales manager, right? Or you'll give us a try on a trial basis. And that's really important with equipment leasing sales. Sometimes they think, oh my goodness, I don't want to have to, have a meeting and get more applications and it's going to be a big deal to try another leasing company. No, we want to make it as simple as possible for them. Look, just give me a shot at your next 3 or 4 transactions. You don't want to just say one because that transaction might get declined, but just give us an opportunity on your next 3, 4, and you say, are you convinced to do that? And if you've got a commodity that is interesting enough for them, if you've resolved their objections, then yes, they will give you a try and get them try you multiple times. You do a good job on, at least one out of, say you get 3 and, one of them gets approved and goes through and they get paid very quickly, then they're going to be hooked and they're going to love doing business with you. And then it's up to you to solidify that relationship and keep it going over time. But, you want to ask for some kind of commitment because they remember when they say yes, and they remember, and so many people don't even ever ask for the business. So that's your job, is to make sure you go through and ask for the business.